By my panel, Liberal MP Tim Wilson and Labor Senator Jenny McAllister. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Tim, I'll start with you. What do you make of this class action that's been launched against the government's so-called robo-debt scheme? I mean, it could lead to lots of people essentially being compensated if the High Court determines that robo-debt is a broken system.
Well, I'm not convinced of that. I mean, obviously, there's something the High Court will have to consider, but in the end, the basic proposition behind the robo-debt system is if people are reporting different things to one agency, to the tax office in comparison to the Department of Social Services, that we simply ask people to obey the law. And yes, you know, the automated system has meant that sometimes there have been some question marks that are raised. They're properly addressed, and there's been a pathway resolution for the government to address. So, of course, the High Court has every right to consider it, but I just don't see it being a situation where anything's going to change.
I'll bring you in, Jenny McAllister. This is going to the High Court. Bill Shorten made this announcement alongside lawyers today. But Labor actually, has only discovered its view that it wants to abolish robo-debt since after the election. Why didn't you see fit that it should be abolished before?
Well, it's a shocking indictment on the government's lack of responsiveness to the enormous problems that have been exposed in this system, that it has to go to the High Court at all. We were very vocal, as you'll recall, in pointing to the many problems in the robo-debt system, the hardship it was causing people, and the fundamental unfairness of forcing a person to prove that they don't have a debt. And it's that onus of proof, that responsibility being placed on a person to go back through their records and demonstrate, often over very long periods of time, that they were in the right when computer says no, that we've really objected to. These are big human decisions and humans ought to be involved, and it's on that basis that we've been vocal for a very long time about the scheme.
Let's move to another big issue, and I think this one's a huge one, which is this announced review into the family law system, and actually it's much bigger than that. I'll start with you, Tim Wilson. Why do we need this review?
Well, the government's already the Law Reform Commission has done a review into the family law system and has made a series of recommendations which the government is going to take to make sure that there is as fast a pathway of resolution when a family breaks down, to put the best interests, obviously, of children at the fore, but also to resolve issues. But there are other challenges that we face that are emerging out of the family law system. One of the things that we hear regularly as members of Parliament is the challenges are faced by grandparents who may take on some sort of custodial role of children in the circumstance of family law. It's about making sure that the system is responsive and addresses the concerns of people who have gone through the system, and make sure, I was part of an inquiry looking at some of the challenges that exist around violence as a result of the family law system. So there are many challenges we face, and what we're doing is setting up a committee to look specifically at it in a bipartisan way in the hope that we can fix the system and give people a better voice and a better chance.
Jenny McAllister, do you support the review?
Well, it's an area of policy that's been pretty badly mishandled. Essentially, the Law Reform Commission did a very comprehensive review. They consulted with many, many stakeholders. They released a really comprehensive report, an interim report. Then Christian Porter announced that he was actually going to sort of abolish the family law courts and merge them with the federal court. This was completely contrary to the direction of the Law Reform Commission, which made the point that the family law system, having a distinct specialist family law system and a court system, is critical for the safety of women, children, and for families. Now we're having a review led by Kevin Andrews. For what purpose? It's really actually very unclear. My concern, I guess, is that the government's just going to keep mucking around with this really important system of law. What they should do, if they are going to proceed with this inquiry, is make sure that they actually consult with people. Because Christian Porter's last effort, just announcing that he was planning to abolish the family court, was appalling, not supported by evidence, and as it turned out, a very bad idea when you look at the findings of the Law Reform Commission.
I want to move on to an issue that's dominated all week, which is in relation to embattled Liberal MP for Chisholm, Gladys Liu. And I'm going to start with you, Tim Wilson, because the government's been arguing that the questions that are being asked of Gladys Liu essentially are xenophobic or racially tinged, or that she's being asked questions that no one else would be asked because she's of Chinese heritage. Do you think the questions, Tim Wilson, that have been asked of Gladys Liu are racist?
Well, what I've said consistently is that new Australians who come to our country have to swear an oath that, frankly, as somebody who was born in Australia, I didn't have to swear. When you come to Parliament, you get elected and then you have to swear an oath in Parliament about your preparedness to serve the people of Australia and, of course, the system of democratic governance we have. I consider that an entirely legitimate basis in which somebody should be able to serve if they've met that threshold. So I think you've then got to prove quite categorically that there's a justification to question things like allegiance. And what Labor has been doing is engaging in a smear campaign, making allusions about things that they won't say directly. And I think that's part of the basis which the government has pushed back so hard against the criticisms of Ms Liu when they haven't been prepared to put up. So they should shut up.
OK, my question is, though, do you think the questions asked of Gladys Liu are racist?
Well, no one in the government has said that, and so therefore I'm not going to meet...
You've suggested that. The government's been suggesting that for the last week.
No, what the government has said is that people shouldn't have to prove their loyalty if they've already met the benchmarks that apply to somebody who sits in the House of Representatives. And the question remains why Labor keeps engaging in this smear campaign but isn't prepared to put up. So if they're not prepared to put up, then they have to shut up.
I'll ask you, Jenny McAllister, you heard the response there from Tim Wilson. Has she met that threshold?
The key problem with Gladys Liu is that she has been unable to explain completely different answers that she's given to the same question on different occasions. She's given at least 3 different answers about her association with a number of groups that are reportedly associated with the Chinese Communist Party. All she needs to do is be transparent, and what we're asking for is a statement in the Parliament that allows her to clarify her own position. That has been at the heart of our questioning, and we've also sought to ask why it is that Scott Morrison and his ministers won't be transparent about their dealings with Ms Liu either.
OK, so if these questions are so important, why didn't Labor ask during question time today?
They were certainly asked in my chamber.
Well, that's
I wasn't in the other place.
Convenient answer. But it was interesting that we didn't see a focus on this in the lower house. I know you're a senator, but don't you see that if it's not being asked, it looks like Labor's abandoned this issue? You've realised that there's nothing more, perhaps?
Look, these are important questions, and really it is incumbent on Ms Liu to explain them. At the heart of our system is transparency, and actually as a parliamentarian that test applies no matter what your ethnic heritage is. If there were questions asked about any of us, we'd all have an obligation to come into the chamber and explain them, and I think that Ms Liu ought to do that. There is a world of difference between making a statement yourself in the chamber with all of the obligations that entails and having someone else table a statement that's been made outside the chamber in the Parliament, which is what's happened in the case of Ms Liu. She really just needs to come into the chamber and explain herself, and that's the standard that all politicians need to abide by.
Tim, moving to your state colleagues in New South Wales, what did you make of this proposed spill motion against Gladys Berejiklian?
Well, I thought it was incredibly disappointing. I mean, I support the New South Wales Premier and the New South Wales Governor, and they carry my confidence. Obviously, some members have decided to take action, and then I'll avoid using a word that normally implies when you take a decision and then try to remove it, but in the context. But it's to me just very disappointing, and I just question the judgment of those involved. But they have to answer to that decision. I mean, I would have thought the focus of the Government of New South Wales, the Premier of New South Wales, should be on delivery for the people of New South Wales, and that's what the Berejiklian governor's doing, and I don't know why he'd interfere with that.
Now, one of the pieces of legislation I just want to quickly talk about before I let you both go is in relation to the so-called big stick for power companies. Opposition Treasury spokesman Jim Chalmers says Labor will take a fresh look at it. Jenny McAllister, Labor used to be against it. Is Labor perhaps now open to supporting this legislation?
Well, we'll take a look at it when we see it. The government is saying or hinting in the newspapers that it will be different this time to last time. But the core problem is this: it will be the government's 17th attempt at bringing forward an energy policy. And the failure to have an energy policy has had enormous consequences for consumers and enormous consequences for our ability to meet our climate obligations. There's already rumblings in the newspapers about various members of the Coalition Party Room who object to this legislation, some saying that it's not tough enough, others saying that it goes too far. Let's just see if they can land a position in the party room and actually introduce the legislation, and then we'd be in a position to actually respond to it. But I'd emphasise that it's critical we have an energy policy, and it's very hard to deliver, obviously, in a Liberal Party room that is deeply divided on questions of energy.
Tim Wilson, are you satisfied now that the changes that you had sought have been provided by the government to this big stick legislation?
Well, firstly, Jenny, you need to update your talking points from this morning. We had our party room meeting, we came up with a position, we adopted it, and it's now being introduced in legislation.
Well, let's see it. Let's take a look at it when it comes through and see whether your people are still happy with it.
Sure, that's fine. And you know, I think this is what happens when you have a party full of debate, of ideas, of people with different perspectives sharing common values. You'll get differing perspectives.
6 years of inaction.
All right, let me finish and then we'll move on. Yep.
Yeah, but the reality is the ministers brought forward a proposition. There have been amendments at different points to proposal to make sure that people's concerns have been accommodated, including my own. And that's the basis in which it enjoyed party room support today to put forward as law. And of course, we'll all continue to monitor the discussion, the debate. We'll wait and see, you know, how it goes through the parliament. But in the end, the focus of the government is to make sure there isn't anti-competitive behaviour that has an impact on increasing electricity prices for consumers. We want prices down, and that's how the government is approaching the issue.
Thank you to both of you.
Thanks, Patricia.
Thanks.